This decision looked sensible at the time, rational, efficient, even inevitable. Everyone involved agreed. The data supported it. The forecasts looked solid. Experts signed off without hesitation. There was no warning sign, no obvious risk, nothing that suggested what would come next. And that's exactly why it worked. At first, in modern systems, decisions are rarely made by instinct anymore. They are made by dashboards, by metrics, by performance indicators. Efficiency becomes the goal. Speed becomes the priority. Anything that slows the system down is treated as a problem that needs to be removed. On paper, this logic is hard to argue with. If something takes longer, optimize it. If something creates friction, eliminate it. That's how progress is supposed to work. The decision itself wasn't dramatic. It didn't involve a risky gamble, or a radical change, or a bold experiment. It was subtle. Reduce friction, streamline the process, remove unnecessary steps. From a business perspective, it made sense. From a technical perspective, it made even more sense. Fewer steps meant fewer delays. Fewer delays meant lower costs. Lower costs meant better performance. The system became faster, cleaner, more predictable. And for a short time, everything improved. Reports looked better. Output increased. Errors appeared to decrease. The decision was quietly labeled a success. But the real impact didn't show up in the metrics. It showed up in behavior. Slowly, people stopped double-checking, not because they didn't care, but because the system no longer asked them to. Small warnings were dismissed, not because they were invisible, but because addressing them meant slowing things down. Edge cases were treated as noise, outliers, exceptions that didn't justify attention. What used to be a pause, a moment to think, to hesitate, to question, was gone. The system no longer allowed for doubt. It only moved forward. At first, this felt like progress. Decisions were faster. Processes were smoother. There was less resistance, but friction isn't always a flaw. Sometimes, friction is what keeps systems stable. When the first real problem appeared, it didn't arrive as a crisis. It arrived quietly. A small issue that should have been contained. A minor deviation that should have been corrected. But there was no space left to stop it. The safeguards were gone. The checkpoints had been removed. The human judgment that once slowed things down had already been optimized away. And the system did exactly what it was designed to do. It kept moving. The failure didn't come from one big mistake. It came from a chain reaction. Each step made sense on its own. Each action followed the rules of efficiency. But together, they created momentum that no one could easily interrupt. By the time anyone realized what was happening, the system was already locked into its own logic. Fixing it meant slowing everything down again, re-adding steps, reintroducing hesitation. But now, that felt like regression. What once looked like progress had quietly become a liability. The decision didn't fail because it was careless. It didn't fail because it was irrational. And it didn't fail because the people behind it were incompetent. It failed because it was incomplete, because it treated efficiency as the only value that mattered. Real systems involve people, and people rely on friction. They rely on hesitation, on doubt, on moments where the system asks them to stop and think. When everything moves too smoothly, mistakes travel faster than corrections. Efficiency removes resistance, but resistance is often what prevents collapse. Looking back, the warning signs were there. They just didn't appear in the data. They appeared in behavior, in silence, in the absence of questions. The decision made sense at the time, and that's what made it dangerous. Because the most damaging choices are rarely the reckless ones. They're the ones everyone agrees on.